You're listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Mattison, Wickert & Layer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for our second edition of the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Today, we have a really fascinating topic. We're going to discuss autonomous vehicle technology and how that technology impacts subrogation claims. I am honored and pleasured today to have Joey Daryanani joining us with CSAA Insurance Group. I'll let him give a brief introduction in a moment. Now, this is a topic and a concept that is just really fascinating, and it's taking the industry by storm. Frankly, actually, most industries by storm. Presentations left, right, center on this at every type of conference you can imagine. Interestingly enough, Joey and I just presented down at the CLM conference in Tampa Bay, and we had a very good result and good comments after the fact. And I think it's going to be a great topic for us to discuss and go back and forth on. So, brief introduction. As you know, my name is Ashton Kirsch. I'm a shareholder with Mattison, Wickert & Layer, managing our auto practice group. And Joey is vice president of CSAA Specialized Services. He has more than 37 years of property and casualty experience at CSAA Insurance Group. Currently, he's managing and heading up CSAA's newest subsidiary, CSAA Specialized Services, a service provider who started out during the pandemic to assist the communities. And Joey, I'll let you jump in. Anything you want to add about your background?
Thanks, Ashton. Thanks for the invite. I'm honored to be here presenting with you again. And yes, been with the company for over 37 years and now lead CSAA Specialized Services, our newest subsidiary. And we are a service provider providing services in the contact center, claims, third-party administration, and training space.
Beautiful. So you have a little bit of experience then, Joey, it sounds.
Just a tad.
All right. So let's just start off. Joey, what is an autonomous vehicle?
So I consider an autonomous vehicle sort of a vehicle that requires no driver ultimately. However, there are different stages of having the vehicle totally be autonomous.
Perfect. I can say that this is a lot of people that are listening, or when we've presented this in the past, they don't necessarily understand how integrated and how actually, the technology is on the roads today. If you go drive down the highway and look to the left, to the right, and you see a Tesla or another new age vehicle driving down the road, there's a very fair chance that they have fully autonomous technology now. It's my understanding that about a third of Teslas currently have full autonomy and full autonomous technology that's capable, with many safeguards in place, of course. But it's here, it's operating. Actually, about a few months ago, a buddy of mine let me use his Tesla to drive to the office in Hartford. So I live in Lake Geneva. My office is in Hartford, about an hour and 20-minute commute. Yeah, crazy to drive that far maybe. But ultimately, I use the vehicle. It's about 5 minutes to the highway and then 5 minutes from the highway on the back end. I use the self-driving technology, this basic version, and I truly was driven to work. I had to keep there monitoring it, but the technology's here. So Joey, tell us a little bit about your knowledge on the different technologies and the levels of autonomy.
Yeah, Ashton, most people think of autonomous vehicles as we go from zero autonomous capability to all of a sudden self-driving, and that isn't the case. I think you just made the point that the vehicles on the road today are in these different levels of self-driving capability, right, of autonomous capability handling. So let's just start with level 0 so I can level set with you. Level 0 for me refers to your average unconnected car, right? Something that has no sensors, no capabilities that we know of, none of these new sort of things that are incorporated into the vehicles. Then we talk about level 1. A level 1 vehicle contains technologies like the simple lane switching assist, something fairly common in vehicles today. Level 2 technologies like the Tesla's autopilot system allows some hands-off operations, and that exists today on the highways. Level 3 system is able to identify and safely operate under conditions without requiring the driver to monitor the roadway. And what's important to note about level 3 systems, it does require an able driver to be present in the driver's seat and be prepared to take back control of the vehicles when the condition changes. Levels 4 and 5 require no driver involvement and execute the driving tasks autonomously. A question here for me is, how comfortable are people with the idea of self-driving cars? So let me just share some of the studies. According to the studies, just 57% of those who are familiar with self-driving technology are eager to ride in one. I am blessed to have ridden in a completely autonomous vehicle in the streets of San Francisco, and I did that last April. And what an experience that was. And I'd be remiss if I'd be lying if I didn't say, I was really afraid right before I jumped into this car. So we get into the car. It's completely new. I'm very afraid of what's going to happen. And frankly, 30 seconds into the trip, I forgot that there was no driver. That transition and change in my own brain was so quick that I went from complete fear to not even noticing the experience.
So you're saying there was no driver even in the driver's seat, right?
Absolutely. There not only was no driver in the driver's seat, there was plexiglass between the passenger compartment and the driver's compartment to make sure that somebody at the back seat could not reach over and take over the driving of this vehicle.
That's fascinating. And somebody can just go and get in one of these autonomous vehicles, or how does this process work?
Yes. So today there is a company in the Bay Area, San Francisco, that is licensed to operate a completely autonomous vehicle for a charge. And the way it works is you call the vehicle by an app on your phone, and it shows up, and it's not any different than riding in, let's say, an Uber or a Lyft, except there is absolutely no driver in this front seat.
Wow. Okay, so now, who are the major players in this industry? Be it manufacturers of vehicles, companies that are operating self-driving technology, and so forth?
Yeah, great question, Ashton. We all know that Tesla is leading the pack, right? That's pretty clear. But I can tell you, big names in the industry like GM and Ford and others are all playing catch up and are investing billions of dollars in technology to compete with the Teslas of the world. And then, other than OEM manufacturers, there are other players that are also investing, such as Rivian and the Waymos. Now, then there's the question around Apple, right? And what is Apple doing? And are they, positioning themselves to be a player in this field?
And I think it's important to note that everywhere you read, the major auto manufacturers, they're investing billions of dollars into this technology. We're not talking about a minor line item on their, their balance or their cash flows. We're talking about billions of dollars, a major shift in how these things are being financed. We have a move to electric vehicles, and we have a move to embracing this autonomous technology. It's my understanding that truly Tesla is currently the leader in this tech, but there's a lot of these other companies who are coming up, developing new technologies. The technology, maybe we'll get time to go into greater detail later, but all of these different manufacturers are really testing different things. Some are using radar, LiDAR sensors. Others are using visual, so actual video recordings. And there's others, there's just so many different, there's actually an interesting company that I was reading about in London. Bill Gates was actually just released a video a few weeks ago with him riding in a self-driving car through London, similar to what Joey had mentioned he did. And those vehicles are using actual machine learning to learn the road. So it's not just that they're using sensors, they're actually using the roads and the experiences to learn about how the vehicle should operate to increase safety going forward. So, it's really fascinating stuff.
Actually, what's really interesting is while us in the insurance industry think of, repairs and liability and subrogation and those types of things. These companies are really focused on how can they either avoid or reduce or totally eliminate road deaths as a result of improper driving by actual physical drivers. So they've got a mission that I think resonates not just with government entities, but with the general population as well.
Absolutely. And that's why we're seeing it expanding so much. I mean, these vehicles are already on the road. Every year, we're seeing a huge increase to the number of vehicles with autonomous technology and the type of autonomous technology, right? One of my vehicles, I have, the tech package, and it's not, fully autonomous, but it's adaptive cruise control, right? And as we see more and more vehicles hit the line and go out into the public, we're going to see more and more autonomy, more and more technology that's going to impact really how vehicles are driven and also how claims are made, what we see as types of claims. I mean, I say that auto subrogation and subrogation in general, it's going to change forever. And the ways that I see this changing, and I'm curious if you agree with me, Joey, is we're going to see the type of claims change, right? We're going to no longer just be talking about a standard auto collision and negligence case, but we're going to actually be talking about product liability claims. There's going to be single vehicle accidents where that autonomous vehicle just loses control and crashes into a tree due to some issue with the tech, or situations where a defendant in that vehicle claim, they're raising it as a defense that no, my driver wasn't at fault. There was no negligence there. It was the vehicle that failed. How does that play out, right? The parties are going to change, right? We're going to have to bring manufacturers in some cases into these cases, not just manufacturers, but we're going to have to bring in distributors, maybe retailers, service techs. There's a lot of different things. The dollar amounts are going to change. Claims are going to get more expensive. Procedures are going to change. Experts are going to change, right? It's no longer just a reconstructionist. Attorneys are going to change. We're going to have a new corral of attorneys who actually have experience in not just auto claims, right? You can't just use a small debt collector for this, but you need attorneys who have experience in product liability and pursuing these cases. And really, I mean, truthfully, with automation, everything about the auto subrogation field is probably going to change. So during the remainder of this time, I think we're going to talk about a couple important things. One, how automobile collisions and the associated claims are going to change with the implementation of autonomous technology. Two, I really want to discuss how the changes to automobile collisions are going to impact associated subrogation claims. Three, what the attorney or the claims professional listening in needs to learn in order to embrace and in order to excel in their career under this new order. And four, the fascinating stuff of what does the future hold? What are our projections? And Joey and I talk about this, all the time. I think, I'm a nerd for this stuff. Just what does the future look like? Are we going to get to the point where every vehicle is autonomous, where they start banning passenger-driven vehicles? It's all really fascinating stuff when it comes down to it. And, ultimately, when it comes to an example of this, right? And I always like to think in examples would be, I want you to think of this scenario where I'm driving down the highway and I'm driving my, let's imagine for our minds, my little pink Subaru. And then fellow shareholder at my firm, Gary Wickard, is driving his big white Escalade. Gary has adaptive cruise control in his vehicle. We're driving down the road. The speed limit changes from 55 to 35. Well, hey, guess what? Gary's cruise control, it doesn't sense it. The technology is not right at this point. So his adaptive cruise control, which is sold and is supposed to change speeds when the speed limit changes, well, he's still going 55. I reduced to 35, 20 mile per hour differential. Obviously, Gary smashes right into the back of me in this example. Well, who's at fault, right? Well, there's no question Gary's at fault. Under the current legal regime, in almost any court you look at, Gary was going to be responsible for causing that accident, despite the fact that his technology may have failed. That's the current mindset. However, could he have a right of contribution? Could there be some way to go against that manufacturer? If he's uninsured, could I pursue the manufacturer as well? Potentially, right? There's also maybe a day and age that we need to think in the future where maybe a vehicle is going to be considered similar to a washer or dryer, where the owner of that washer and dryer isn't necessarily responsible for the failure and the water loss, but for a showing of negligence, right? Where you have to actually show negligence as the plaintiff on the owner to hold them liable. Otherwise, you're stuck pursuing the manufacturer. We're not there yet. We're probably nowhere near that. But more and more, we're going to see these defenses come up. The defense I typically see already is, the defendant raises the fact of the defect in We see this all the time with the lane sensors, right? Lane assist keeps you in the lane. If you get near, could say the other lane, it kind of stops you, and then you have to override it to go over, right? I have that in my vehicle. The crazy thing about it is a lot of times when I'm merging onto the highway, and I hear this from everyone who has this technology, it kind of pushes you a little bit. You're pushing back and forth. And this causes accidents all the time. And that driver's saying, hey, I'm not negligent, right? The vehicle pushed me into you. It wasn't my driving. So we see it already. We have to deal with it in current cases. But as we see autonomy increase, as we have more and more of these claims, it's going to get to be the primary factor in these cases. So we've already seen quite a few of these incidents. There's currently a case that's under investigation by the regulators down in Florida and nationally involving a man named Joshua Brown, a 40-year-old who was killed on May 7th last year, Williston, Florida. He was driving his Tesla Model S. It's our understanding, and this is all allegations. We don't know anything for certain because it's under investigation. But it's our understanding, and they believe he was driving on autopilot, and the vehicle failed to activate its brakes, and it hit a truck. The assumption and what they're thinking is that truck had a white trailer. The white trailer was similar to the sensors as the white sky. It didn't sense it. It didn't see it, smashed into it, and we had just truly a catastrophe. This is being investigated. Hopefully we get more information from this and many other incidents involving this technology as we go forward. But currently, we're going to talk about a lot today. But there's just so much that's unknown. It's really the wild west of claims when it comes to this. So that's where it's fascinating. But as we move forward, more and more is going to develop. So next up, Joey, I'm going to ask you a few questions. So when it comes to these product liability claims, can you tell me a little bit about how this is going to change and how this is going to impact claims in your experience?
Yeah, Ashton, frankly, this has me really worried, right? Before I talk about product liability, I want to talk about the current state of carriers like us. Today, our least experienced people are the ones responsible for taking first notice of loss in an auto loss, for example. And that person now not only has to set up services, making sure that the customer is satisfied with that experience, but now they have to figure out sort of when and in which cases they'll need to consider hiring experts and preserving evidence. It's not uncommon for us to stumble when you have your washing machine in a property loss where the hose develops a leak and floods the house. Preserving that hose is already a challenge, making it, just that small piece that we really struggle with how to preserve that evidence and send it for testing. Now we're talking about technology that, and product liability that we need to teach our front lines on. And how do you do that and how do they evolve? So I see the insurance industry and how we manage claims on the front end changing even more rapidly around how we provide training around product liability, when to introduce that concept, knowing that people like us, ever since we were claims adjusters, our training was to find defendants in this case, right? And when we think of defendants in a car accident, we're always thinking driver's fault, right? What percentage of comparative negligence and those types of things. Today, when we introduce product liability into that, this whole world gets sort of more complex, more than we've ever seen before. So now let's talk about sort of developing an understanding of product defect claims, right? First of all, we need to know the best practices for investigating a case involving a defective product, right? This isn't, the microwave that you buy from Best Buy. This is a vehicle that has, to your point, lots of technology built in, including sensors and videos and so forth. You need to become an expert in the law surrounding product defect claims, right? Very important, especially from my perspective on my side of the table from the insurance industry. The third is, when and who to retain as counsel, and at what point in the claims handling process do you retain counsel? And I'm sure you can speak to that, Ashton, instead of me, so I'll let you to speak to that later. the line that I really like is we need to become an expert in selecting experts. Let that resonate a little bit. Expert retention is a must. We all know the price tag that comes with it. And at what point do you retain an expert in the handling of the case, and which cases you use where you bring in an expert, and how early do you do that? The other piece is, really trying to marry the skill set of being an engineer and a data expert, which is what you're going to need moving forward. I don't know that we all have a list today of people or companies that we can rely on to be able to provide that service to us. So my advice is do not trust CVs right now where they say they're experts in both being an engineer and being a data expert. I am very suspicious of companies that offer that service today.
And we see this all the time on our end because obviously we retain a lot of experts, products cases, reconstructionists for auto claims and wherever it is. And sadly, a lot of the engineering firms out there, very reputable, are starting to sell themselves and some of their experts as having this background and this experience and the ability to handle autonomous technology claims. But the hard part is, then you look at who is assigned, and they're assigning that expert who handles the battery fire cases, which are huge. And that's a big case. I mean, we could give a presentation on electric vehicle fires all in and of itself. But ultimately, those are the people that they're assigned to these losses. The hard part is we need data experts, right? We need individuals, and there's frankly only maybe a dozen that I'm aware of around the country who are currently up and ready and prepared to handle these cases. The strange thing is to get the data and to review everything, you need to work with the defendants. And there haven't been enough cases that we're aware of so far where the experts have truly even the codes and the ability to understand a lot of this technology as things are developing, right? There's a lot of things that are going to come up in the future that as regulators start digging into this, as discovery leads to more results, as more becomes public, it's going to be easier for these firms to actually start reviewing things. I mean, the fascinating incidents that we're going to see are going to be those scenarios wherein we're not just arguing just like the true defect in the product exactly, but we're talking about a defect in the algorithms or a defect in how decisions are made in that process through the technology. I want you to envision the scenario, it's spoken about a lot, of the vehicle driving down the road on full auto mode, and there's a cow in one lane, and there's a baby stroller with a baby in it in the other lane, right? For the safety of the driver, the decision of that vehicle has to be to hit the baby, right? Way safer. But most every driver, at least anyone with a decent moral compass, is going to go and take impact with that cow, despite the slightly greater risk to the driver, right? You're saving a child. And how do these, as the technology develops, we don't know how these decisions are being made. We can't get into a lot of this is proprietary, but eventually this is going to come out, and that's really where it's going to get fascinating. So the biggest thing is becoming an expert and selecting experts is a huge thing, as Joey mentioned. This is just for everything, way more so for products cases than anything else. And when he says don't trust the CV, it's just that. I mean, we need to get these experts on the phone, be asking them questions, no matter what it is. A lot of times, if you're new to this, you just find somebody, great Ivy League education, PE, or doctorate from Stanford or whatever, excellent college, and we just trust them. But we're not asking the question to make sure that they have the specific expertise. Joey mentioned attorneys. It's the same thing, right? This might sound self-serving coming from me, but you need somebody who knows not just products claims in general even, but also these specific types of products claims. So it's a joint expertise between auto and property. It's the same way as, we need to have special people that handle debt collections, right? My firm doesn't do debt collections in the same way as debt collectors shouldn't do insured third-party complex subrogation or litigation in general. It's finding the right person for the right job and making sure, especially when these things get more complex, we can't be lazy. Interestingly enough, this is going to totally cause a shock to the auto subrogation field for the carriers, as I understand it, because those individual adjusters who maybe previously could handle 250 cases, when you have products in play, they're going to have to handle far fewer cases or have some different way of handling it internally. Now, Joey, have you seen anything related to what the carriers are currently doing or what you think that they will do to be able to account for the additional, you could say, time drag of including products claims in auto subrogation?
Yeah, boy, have we seen it on my end. So I'm just going to give you an example, right? Take a regular Volkswagen, for example, that has none of the technologies that we've been talking about. That front bumper cover is roughly about $300 today. If you talk about a Tesla Model 3, their front fascia system is priced between 1995 and 29.95, and I'm talking the thousands, not just dollars. So yes, we've seen costs increasing with the implementation of technologies. The sensors and AI needed to function self-driving technology obviously is very expensive. And many sensors and systems are integrated in locations throughout the interior and exterior of the car, not just in the bumper. I think our audience here will not be surprised to know that technology exists in the windshield. And not only when you replace a windshield today, it just doesn't come with a windshield. It has to come with those components in the windshield and a separate charge to calibrate those windshields so that the technology can work in the future. Now, mind you, this increase in cost will be in addition to the already rising costs today, plus inflationary pressures that we're all seeing right now. And I can guarantee you that this will impact insurance pricing at a greater pace in the future than we've ever seen in the past. And this does not include any deep pocket type litigation in product liability cases where the plaintiff bar will look to certainly include those defendants as part of any lawsuit.
Absolutely. And speaking of who to include in those lawsuits, that's one other thing I did want to touch on is that's going to be totally different here too, because obviously we have the other driver. In any of these subrogation claims involving an autonomous vehicle on the other end, or even a one vehicle incident, if there's another vehicle involved, you have the other driver. Still always going to be the case until the technology gets so advanced that it's considered like a washer or dryer. Ultimately, that other driver, though, with the current technology, Tesla's and the other vehicles, the way I understand it, is they all still require that driver to be paying attention the whole time, right? That's what they're telling people. Even Elon Musk released something that I have read recently saying that those drivers need to make sure that they're actively monitoring that vehicle. The self-driving technology, though it's there, it still has bugs and certain things that doesn't make it fully okay to go lay back and take a nap. So that driver ultimately, I think no matter what happens, is going to be responsible for that incident. But there's other parties that could come into play here. We have repair shops. There's going to be a lot of shops that start trying to work on these sensors, on these vehicles that have no idea what they're doing, and they might do something wrong. So we're going to see a lot of cases like that where that repair company doesn't repair a sensor appropriately, installs the wrong sensor as a repair, or does something to impact that vehicle causing an incident. We'll see more of that. Obviously, we have the claims against the manufacturers. Those could be, one of three types of defects. Product liability, product claims come in three ways. It's a defective design, which would be the design of the actual vehicle, be it the algorithms or the way that the sensors are set up. Maybe it creates blind spots, various things. So the design of the vehicle in whole, that's a design defect. Or it could be a defect, a manufacturing defect that involves a defect in the actual way that that specific item was manufactured. Well, maybe the glass on one of those sensors or the optical lenses hadn't formed appropriately, and it caused the sensor to misfire operating properly, causing an incident. The final one is the failure to warn, right? A failure to warn would be something with that technology. Let's say that one of these manufacturers said, yep, we have full self-driving technology. Go out there, take a nap, go to sleep. Well, ultimately, that's not what their technology is appropriate for just yet. You need to monitor. So there's the ability to pursue a product claim based on failure to warn. Different states have different rules, either second or third restatements of torts, which could be a whole podcast in and of itself. But there's always going to be different deviations depending on the state where the incident occurs. Other parties we can consider is if there's other parts and other component parts that come into play. anything else, there's going to be additional. I've seen cases involving car washes that didn't wash appropriately, damage the sensor. There's so many different parties at play, and that's why as we move forward, this gets super complex. But we're just starting to see the beginning of it. As Joey mentioned, cost of claims are increasing in a crazy amount. My Volkswagen, one of my vehicles, I just recently had a front window replaced, and then also had a Jeep Wrangler that had its window needed replaced. Right, my Volkswagen has the technology, package. So the cost for that window on the Volkswagen was about $1,200. While the cost for the one on my Jeep was a little bit less than $300. And that's because they had to collaborate and they had to get everything working so that it was cohesive due to the sensors. So costs are going to be huge. So now we're going to start seeing more claims, right? Not just will it take more time to pursue a claim involving product liability, but we're going to see far more because typically if we had a $500 loss from a small little fender bender, that insured very well might not even bring that claim forward or notice the carrier, actually make a claim. But now with that, as Joey mentioned, the Tesla Model 3, the front fascia system, we're talking about $2,000 to $3,000 just for a front bumper, basically. So the costs are going to be huge. We're going to see larger claims and also just more claims submitted in general. Now, a really fascinating thing to talk about is, where does this take us in the future? Like, what are we going to see? We know where we are today. We know that claims teams, adjusters, insurance companies are going to need to start training their auto teams or finding a new way to rework things internally to be able to handle the increase in product liability with these cases. But where does it go? Ultimately, I think that the next decade is going to include, a significant amount of discussion and regulation. You already see a lot of state legislatures and the federal government reviewing draft regulations and different things that we can do to make sure that the roads are safe for the new coming self-driving technology. Different states have different rules. Currently, Texas is allowing self-driving testing technology around the state to different places. Obviously, California, as Joey mentioned, San Francisco, you have self-driving vehicles already. And more locations and areas are starting to say, what the heck do we do with this technology? How are we going to make sure that we can keep our roads safe while also allowing room for innovation? So we'll see a lot of that. There'll be a lot of discussion, a lot of, it'll hit the news as more and more states start passing law on this. Also, are we going to start seeing what happens when we get to the point? And this is kind of a fascinating thing that I think about. What happens when the government can say that they can limit with mandated self-driving technology? Joey, I'd love your thoughts. What would happen in your mind if the government said we can get rid of 99% of vehicle crashes and save hundreds of thousands of lives, limit millions of injuries every single year by simply saying no more personal individual-driven vehicles? What do we do? Do we see that coming down the pipe? What do you think?
I think it's interesting. If you'd asked me that 3 years ago, I'd have said no. Today, we've just been through a significant pandemic where that's exactly the position the government took, right? So I would say yes right now, and I don't know which form, but it could absolutely happen just based on events of the last 3 years.
Right. And it's kind of it's an interesting thing to start thinking about. I don't know. We're not looking anywhere in the next decade or so for actually outlawing human-driven vehicles, right? I mean, there is precedent for it. I mean, at one point, people were really bothered when it wasn't efficient for them to ride their horse and buggy to work because there was the actual automobile. So things do change. And I don't know when this change happens or if it even happens. But one thing I can say almost with certainty is that you're going to see things start to change involving the embracing of self-driving full autonomy in some areas. For example, certain cities are already talking about having full autonomous zones where, let's say, example being, they're not considering it, but let's say LA starts to consider, you know what, in the downtown area where we have deadlocked traffic every morning and evening or pretty much any time, you can only operate within this downtown area within a fully autonomous vehicle. Because guess what that does? That makes cohesive traffic patterns, and you could immediately get rid of any congestion, right? Those vehicles can go quicker. They can cooperate with the technology, and no more traffic. Also, there's certain states that are considering the idea of an autonomous only lane on the highway. The general premise there is that those vehicles, if they're working together and the computers are actually matching each other and speaking to each other, they could go truthfully at really whatever speed they wanted to go. Whatever speed that vehicle could go, you could get to the point where you have highway lanes where it's going 300 miles per hour, right? That you could only do with only autonomous vehicles. You put one self-driven, human-driven vehicle there, and next thing you know, the technology and the benefits don't exist anymore. So, I mean, those are the fascinating things we're seeing. It's already starting. Down in Texas, I've heard stories about the testing of fully autonomous commercial tractors. Obviously, that's still with the driver in the vehicle. They're not driving, several ton tractors down the road, but they do have that driver testing the technology. This is being tested on all fronts, and it's truly going to be fascinating to see where this goes. Joey, any additional insights on that?
Yeah, no, I think in closing, one, Ashton, thank you for having me again. Two is I enjoy this topic a lot, and I hope our audience has as well. If you're walking away with more questions, that is the intent of this, is there's a lot we don't know and a lot to be resolved.
Absolutely. It's going to be many years before we can give much more than just projections here. We see the changes starting. We see it impacting claims groups. But obviously, each year it's going to be different. So I'd love to, get back with you in a year from now and see what changes, what additional efficiencies, what inefficiencies, and what we're seeing in the claims industry. But it's going to be a battle. It's going to be interesting to see what occurs here. So, that's what we have. We're trying to keep these podcasts brief. Joey, thank you so much for being here with me today. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for joining, Joey. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for listening to this second podcast with the Subrogation Support Network. This is going to be an excellent opportunity for us to have these podcasts every couple of weeks, whenever it becomes relevant with new topics. If anybody in the audience has a topic, has an interesting concept that you want us to either speak on, or if you'd like to even come on to the podcast and speak, we'd love to have you. Either way, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Signing off, Ashton Kirsch with the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Thank you.